Welcome to the Matt Cuda Photography Podcast, a podcast that explores nature and wildlife photography in your own backyard and throughout the United States. Well, welcome back. This is the next podcast, episode 3, in the series we've been doing on getting started in wildlife photography. How do we do that? Last week we talked about the camera and how important the specific type of camera you buy is. In this episode, I'm going to explore lenses and what lenses, in my opinion, are the lenses to get you started, especially when you're on a limited budget. And that's a theme in this series of podcasts that I'm doing is I think the vast majority of the people out there are on a very, very tight budget. And because of that, I want to focus on just how close you can cut that budget and still produce good results. So, first, in wildlife photography, we're dealing with a subject that really doesn't want to be photographed. So in order to compensate, we need to purchase lenses that can get us full-frame shots of our subjects. Now, you may not always want a full-frame shot of your subject, but you need to have that lens in your arsenal that will allow you to do that and gives you that flexibility. If you're always limited by your gear, you're going to produce a certain kind of photograph, and that may be fine. Folks like Moose Peterson, in his early days, could not afford a high-end piece of glass, and he started shooting with a 400mm lens. I believe it was a Tokina, if I remember right. And he had to make do with that, and out of that came a certain style that he had. But today he's shooting with 600mm lenses and larger with teleextenders as much as he can or needs to. So it's important to have these tools available, and I want that to kind of ring true. These are tools. Just as a guitar player has his guitar, it doesn't, just because you have a nice guitar doesn't make you an awesome guitar player. But without the guitar, you're not a guitar player. And so there's always this dichotomy, or I don't know how you want to say it, where as a photographer, you are two things. You are, one, a very creative individual. You like to see things, you like to see imagery, you like to see color, you like to see absence of color. You're very right-brained, if you will. And that's one component. But the other component of photography is very, very technical. And that part has to be there as well. Photography is a union of those two. It's a union of your creativity and hardware, basically, that makes you who you are as a photographer and gives you your style as a photographer. And so I don't want these podcasts to make you think, oh, it's equipment, gear. Another great photographer, Art Morris, put it this way: it ain't the lens. Okay, and what he's saying is that although you have a nice lens, a lens will not make a photographer. A lens is a tool to get you closer to your subject. And along these lines, I want to say one more thing before we get into the nitty-gritty. Lenses, and long lenses particularly, up in the 600mm range, get you farther away from your subject, and they also enhance the background blur. And that's all great and everything, and that's part of the creativity. But another thing that it does is it keeps you from putting too much pressure on the animal. Case in point, I saw a photographer with a smartphone who crawled on his belly up to within 2 feet from a raptor that was on a kill. Now, if any of you know anything about raptors, a lot of times hawks specifically will sit right on top of their kill and will not let you close. Well, when you're crawling up to that, they're going to let you get that close, but you're stressing that animal out beyond imagination. I mean, he is just beside himself. He doesn't know what to do. And there's no reason to do that. That's why we have this gear. For one reason is to keep us from pressuring the animal, keep us from disturbing the animal. We don't want animals to fear humans. I guess in some ways we do, because we don't want them attacking us, but the bottom line is we don't want to interfere with what they're doing. We're here to observe them, take photographs, enjoy yourself, but the lens has so much to do with this whole genre of wildlife photography, and I could probably spend an hour just talking about that. But I want to move on. Let's get into what you really want to know, which is what lens is good on a budget, or what lenses. So today I'm going to discuss 3 lenses that for me have worked great, and I believe they will get you started on the right foot without breaking the bank. I'll list the links to these lenses in the show notes. And the first lens that I want to talk about is a lens that I was kind of a second lens for me. And it really shocked me at the quality of this lens, especially for this price point. And that's the SP 70 to 300 millimeter f 4.5.6 DI VC USD. So it's a 4 to 5.6. Let's go through several of the features of this lens and look at the pros and cons. This lens is my pick for the extremely budget-minded individual in a medium telephoto range. Now, when I say medium telephoto, generally I'm talking about a lens in the 200-300 millimeter range. This is a great lens range for the beginner because it teaches you hand-holding techniques. It teaches you how to blur out backgrounds, how a telephoto behaves differently from a wide-angle lens or a normal lens. And so I think it's a good starting combination. That 70 to 300 combo zoom lens is just fabulous, and I highly recommend it. So this lens was first introduced in 2010 and is still being manufactured by Tamron to this day. So it's fairly new. It's a 70 to 300. We already talked about that. It incorporates vibration compensation. Now, vibration compensation, also called image stabilization or optical stabilization, depending on your system. This is a relatively new invention that allows photographers to handhold their lens, and it stabilizes itself, so you don't need a tripod as much as you used to, 10, 15 years ago. Does it work good on this lens? Yeah, it does. I can get a couple stops out of it. I don't want to say, maybe the newer variants of it are a little bit better. I don't want to say it's the greatest stabilization I've ever seen, but it does work. And there have been times that it has saved me. So, do I like image stabilization? Absolutely. I have a hard time buying a lens now without it, even though I know I can and still make great photographs. So that's not a deal breaker for me one way or the other, but I do prefer it as a feature. Probably the nicest thing about this lens is it's sharp even at 300 millimeters. It uses extra low dispersion glass, or LDs. A lot of the newer lenses are using this, and it's really, really boosted the quality of third-party lenses in general, in my opinion. I've been just thoroughly happy with this lens. It's well built. I've dropped mine at least 3 times. It has a rubberized exterior, which kind of helps during dropping. It also has a reversible lens hood. And so what that means is when you take off your lens hood and stow it, it stows or secures to the outside of your lens. So that's good when you drop it. I think sometimes that helps to kind of soften the blow, if you will. And so I like that feature. I wished all lens manufacturers did that. It's 12 groups and 17 elements for those that are follow that kind of thing. Hey, in my mind, I don't care how many groups and elements it has as long as it's sharp. It has a 9-blade diaphragm, which is what stops down to make your aperture. It gives a kind of a pleasing background blur, or bokeh. I like it. Have I seen better bokeh out of Canon lenses? Yeah, but it certainly is up to par in my opinion. I have compared this with other L lens photographs that I've taken from Canon's luxury line, and although the L beats it slightly, it's very, very difficult to determine the winner, honestly. I've seen some really, really sharp images out of this lens, and I've seen really, really, really sharp images out of Canon L lenses. It has a 62 millimeter filter diameter. Now, to me, a lot of people get bent out of shape with the filter diameters. In wildlife photography, it's not really much of an issue because generally you're not putting, 99.9% of the time, I am not going to put a filter on my 70 to 300. Unless I'm doing a landscape or something, or I'm shooting water and I want to avoid the reflection. But in wildlife photography, I'm just shooting. I don't care about polarization or anything like that. So it really means nothing to me. It does have a lens hood, as I mentioned. It's kind of a flower tulip shaped lens hood. I have mixed feelings about those type of lens hoods. I like the round lens hoods better, simply because you can put the camera on its hood if you have to, and it won't fall over. I mean, I know seems crazy, but to me that's more of a feature to be able to set it on its hood if you have to. Although I really don't recommend doing that. It's quite compact. It's actually, I don't have the inches and measurement in front of me, but it fits inside my camera bag very easily. It's just tiny compared to my 150 to 600. And it's just a good medium telephoto lens. Another feature, which I have found that I really, really love about modern lenses, is full-time manual focus. And what that means is, let's say I'm focused with autofocus on a bird, and I notice my autofocus is just not quite right. I can reach up and turn that manual focus ring while autofocus mode's engaged and really dial in that focus. So I really think that, and I've used it before and not been able to, not scared the bird away. In the old days, or in the cheaper lenses, I should say, sometimes you'll scare the bird because you got to flip the switch over to manual, and then you got to, that switch flipping is all it takes to scare a bird away. And so sometimes having full-time manual focus can mean the difference between getting the shot and going home empty. I mean, honestly, when it comes right down to it. Again, this is why features are important. It's not because you can't take a great photograph with a lens that doesn't have the features. It's that the features give you a higher probability of success. And again, I keep talking about that. I'm going to drill it home. Features give you better probability. It doesn't mean that you can't take a great shot with a cheaper lens or with cheaper gear or non-feature, this feature is missing. It doesn't mean that. It just means that it's more bang for your buck. Okay? Just think of it that way. It's more bang for your buck. And as you become better at photography, you realize, oh yeah, this full-time manual focus is great. How did I ever get along without this? And that's why some of the stuff costs more. And that's why I recommend Tamron and Sigma as both great manufacturers for the beginner or the person, even the pro, honestly, that is on a budget. Now, I consider myself a semi-pro, and so I'm really looking for that budget. I don't want to make it so my family can't eat because I decided to buy a new camera or a new lens. It's light. It's a little over a pound, I think, and it's light enough to handhold for extended periods of time. I have handheld this lens all day long, pretty much, and without any problems. Yeah, you start to feel it in your shoulders, but nothing like a 600 or something like that. It's a fraction of that weight. It uses a USD ultrasonic drive. Basically, that just means it's Tamron's latest autofocus system. It's a little quieter. Okay, yeah. I mean, with wildlife, sure. The quieter, the better. Again, another feature. So that's pretty much the pros. That's the things I like about this lens. Let's talk about the cons. Why did they not put a tripod foot with this lens? I do not understand it. It's heavy enough. It's similar in weight to the Canon 70 to 200L lens, which does have a foot available for it. I have wanted a foot for this lens for years, and I'm just very disappointed in Tamron for not doing that. But that's life, I guess. I'll post some links to in the show notes to some of the photographs I've taken with this particular lens, so you can kind of judge for yourself. Like I said, though, I'm very impressed with it. I'm going to list another con here, and I want you to, again, this could be just my take on this. I have not been happy with this lens with my Canon 7D. On my 1D Mark II, it was a match made in heaven. Okay, it was an excellent match. Together, they were just, it was synergy heaven. But on my 7D, I had focusing issues. I have stalled focusing. But I'm finding that this is a problem with the 7D in general. It's not that the 7D can't do it. It does do it. It's just, once you've had an autofocus system as good as a 1 series, you start to see the faults in the mid-range systems. Now, I've heard this is changing. I've heard in the Canon 7D Mark II, they've resolved these issues. That's fine. We're not talking about that here. I just want to let you know, because I recommended the 7D last week, and I still recommend it. But be careful with this lens. Go ahead and get one, try it out, see what you think. I had to do a lot of micro focus adjustment with this lens to get it right, and I still use it, so I haven't thrown it away or anything. It's still in my bag, and it works great. But you gotta bear in mind, it's not an awesome birds in flight lens, but awesome for tame birds, tame animals of any kind. When you can get in close, I use it sometimes for scenics, getting a little bit of a more compressed view of a scenic. But for straight wildlife, I like it for tame situations. I really almost never use this for birds in flight or really any serious field work. I'm not saying you can't do it. I did use it that way in the past, but now I've gone completely to my 150 to 600 for pretty much all my field work. So that's pretty much it. Not a lot of cons. It's a heck of a lens at a heck of a price. I mean, we're talking, I can buy this lens on KEH for $299. You can't beat that with a stick. I mean, when you consider most lenses in this category that are, and this is an SP lens, and SP are better quality Tamron lenses. They're kind of, I guess, quote, pro quality or luxury quality Tamron lenses. So anytime you see that SP, you know that it's supposed to be one of their better quality lenses. I wanted to move on next to the for those that can afford a little bit more. I like to have two options when on these gear conversations here. So for the budget-minded, I'm recommending the Tamron 70 to 300, and for the guy who can afford a little bit more, maybe in the range of $600-700, I'm going to move you to the Canon 70 to 200 f4L. Yeah, you're going to lose 100 millimeters, okay? But understand what this lens is for. This lens is a medium telephoto, so you're not going to be taking this out and generally shooting birds in flight, okay? That's not that you can't do it sometimes. You can. I've done it. But, again, you're looking for situations where you have tame animals that you can get close to, raptor centers, special events for photographers to get close and personal with the animals. This is the perfect lens for that. It's a good starter lens. It's a good lens to get you headed down the right path. It's very sharp. It's compact. It's light. It's built out of aluminum. It's got 16 elements and 13 groups. And probably the best feature of this lens, well, I don't know if it's the best feature, but probably close to it, is its f4 throughout the range of the zoom. So no matter what zoom, what focal length you are at, it's going to be f4 constant. And why is that important? Well, Oftentimes, as wildlife photographers, we are called upon to get out there in the field early in the morning, late in the afternoon, and you need a lot of light. F4 is going to give you a good deal of light. It's going to get you up in there, at least 1/500th of a second in the morning, and it's going to get you, if you're in the woods at F4, you're going to be somewhere around 1/160th of a second, somewhere around in there, maybe even a 200th of a second. And that's a lot, because when you consider on my 70 to 300 I just mentioned, the Tamron, let's say you're in that dark woods situation, which I've been in at least several times. Being able to shoot at as fast a shutter speed as you can is crucial. It can make the difference between a blurry shot and a sharp shot. And again, we're talking about consistency. We're talking about being able to increase our probability of success. So that f4 is crucial. It's a 67mm filter size, pretty standard in the filter world for this type of lens. It's got an 8-blade aperture. It's down a blade actually from the Tamron, but still excellent bokeh, excellent background blur. It's very sharp, wide open, very sharp, even at 200mm. It's a stunningly sharp lens, and that might be worth it for some of you out there just when I say that. But I don't want you to get hung up on that idea, because sharpness is sometimes a little bit of an illusion. Sharpness and resolution of the lens are super important. Don't get me wrong. But sometimes just the way the lighting is will mean the difference between something that appears sharp and something that appears soft. What do I mean by that? Well, if you've ever seen direct light and you've seen it strike a subject, say a bird's eye, for example, it gives you the illusion that it's sharp sometimes, even if it's just a little bit soft, because of the contrast that light provides. And so you got to be careful right there. Yeah, here's my recommendation. Buy the sharpest lens you can afford. But don't let it stop you from buying a slightly cheaper lens. Now, don't go crazy and go out and buy a $100, consumer grade lens, because you're going to throw it away in a year because you're not going to be happy with it, and you're going to be out $100. Better to save up your money, get something that you know is going to work. It does have full-time manual focus. It has a very nice focusing ring. Just amazing quality on that. The build quality of the Canon L series is it's beyond reproach. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It does have a tripod collar that's available. It is not shipped with that. Like I said, it's a light lens, and a lot of people just hand hold it. But they do make the tripod collar available, which I am extremely happy for. And the autofocus is good. The autofocus is better, in my opinion, than the Tamron 70 to 300. I like to call it a snappy autofocus. It snaps into focus. And, again, it depends on what you're going to use it for. Generally in wildlife, we want autofocus to be super fast. If I were going to use this for portraits, yeah, I might want it fast, but if it's not a deal breaker if it's a little slow. Now some portrait guy's going to write me a nasty gram saying, no, we want a fast autofocus. I'm just saying, when you have a moving subject, and I mean a really fast moving subject, you want the best autofocus you can get, the best you can afford. Okay, what are the cons of this lens? The one I'm recommending does not have image stabilization. They do make a version of this lens that has image stabilization, and if you can afford that version, by all means do it. The one I've used in the past does have image stabilization, and it does come in handy. Again, you're increasing your probability of success, any feature that you can add to your lens. But again, you can always buy the tripod collar, and you can always mount it. And look, folks, people were creating great images long before image stabilization was created, believe me. So it's definitely doable, but again, if you can afford the IS, go for it. Where I really love this lens, when you're on a budget, this lens is awesome for bird setup photography. Now, you gotta get close. You gotta set up close, so you're gonna have to have your blind within, 3 feet, 4 feet of your subject. But it is killer. I mean, being that close, you set your aperture at like f8, and it's just mind-numbing. I'll put an image out there that I took that close in the show notes. I'll put a link to it. It was that close, kind of a side lit, just nice shot of a bird on a branch, beautiful. And it was taken with this particular lens. I do not own this lens. Let me be honest with you. In the past, I've just borrowed this lens from someone that I know when I need it. But I do recommend it. It's a fabulous lens, and I'll probably end up purchasing it somewhere down the road. Right now, it's not a high priority because, like I said, I'm using my 150 to 600 almost, probably 95% of the time now. But whatever you do, don't buy this lens so you can have quote L bragging rights. In other words, don't buy this lens because it's a white luxury lens. Buy it because it's a good lens and you need the lens. Don't buy it because it makes you look cool. We got enough photographers out there that are just trying to look cool. Get you the lens that's going to make great photographs. Forget about everything else. That's just a waste of time. So that's my picks for lenses in the medium telephoto range. And that's my picks for both the 1D Mark II and the 7D. I just wanted to reiterate that this is a medium telephoto. It is designed to get you shots in situations that a 50 won't work or 85mm won't work. It's getting you closer, it's compressing, it's making that background have a better blur. And along those lines, and just a little tip here, background blur is not just a property of having a telephoto lens. It is, but in order to make it effective, you have to decrease your distance to the subject. So as you decrease your distance to the subject, the background becomes blurrier and blurrier and blurrier because of the depth of field shift. And so that's something you need to keep in mind. If you want that really creamy, beautiful background, you're going to have to get down low. Let's say you're taking a picture of a sandpiper of some kind. You're going to get down low on your belly. You're going to line up even with that bird, and you're going to get close. I mean, within 10 feet. And that's how you get that pleasing blur. So just a little tip there. I know it's mostly a gear-related podcast, but just a quick tip. The next type of lens I want to talk about is a super telephoto. Super telephotos become important as you grow in your wildlife photography skills. You start to realize, I could really need to blur the background out a little more. I really need to be able to stay just outside the animal's fight or flight zone. And that's something important I need to talk about real quick. Animals, and you probably already know this, of course, because you've been around wild animals to some degree in your life. Animals have a fight or flight zone, and it's different for each species or even animal. They all have their own personalities, but generally speaking, with birds, songbirds, it's usually within 10 feet, they're gone. Larger birds, like the herons, if they're not used to people, especially great blue herons, they're one of the worst at being skittish. If it's a wild great blue heron, I can't get within 30, 40 yards of that thing. Is gone. They do not tolerate people at all. And so having this super telephoto, which is a lens, I define it as a lens anywhere from 400 millimeters to 800 millimeters, becomes crucial. And again, we're increasing that probability of success. Do you have to have it to start with? No, you don't. Like I said, I recommend starting out with a 70 to 300. And then if you find that you like this genre, you like wildlife photography, then let's talk about moving up and getting some bigger lenses. But whatever you do, don't just go hog wild and go out to Amazon and buy $3,000 worth of stuff and then don't use it. make sure you actually enjoy what you're doing first. Take a trip to the zoo, take a trip to some of the more heavily populated by human areas for wildlife photography and see if you enjoy it. Because if you don't, man, there's no reason to go out there and drop $2,000-$3,000 on a lens. That's just silly. There's two lenses that I recommend for the budget-minded that are in the 600 millimeter range for super telephoto. The first one is the Tamron 150-600 VC. I've heard a lot of great things about this lens. I've seen a lot of great shots. It is a well-known, respected lens. I have never shot with that lens, but I can guarantee if you buy it, you'll be happy with it. It costs about $1,064 new. And you can pick them up for about $800, $900 used. It's a very popular lens. The other one, and the one that I bought, is the Sigma 150-600 Contemporary. That lens is going to run $1,089 new, and it's still so new there's not very many used on the market. I'm guessing similarly you're going to spend $800 to $900 used for it. But wow, when you consider that other 600 millimeters lenses and 500 millimeter lenses are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times that cost, it's huge. I mean, I think about this. I think if I remember right, I used 600 millimeter f4 Canon L lens on the used market. I think is going for about $7,000 right now. That's crazy, guys. I mean, if you're doing this for a living, that's great. If you can afford it, awesome, go do it. But come on, let's get back into the real world here where most people live. We can do better. And now that we have two third-party manufacturers that are providing, in my mind, a great alternative, there's no excuse for serious wildlife photographers to not save up some money and go buy one of these lenses. I mean, at $1,000, $800 to $1,000, you just can't go wrong. So what I want to do today, I don't want to talk about the Tamron because I don't have practical experience with it. I'm going to talk about its counterpart, I guess, in the lens world, or Sigma's answer to that lens, which is the Sigma 150-600 f5 to 6.3 Dg Os Hsm. Wow, that's a mouthful. Let's talk about the features. It's part of the Contemporary line. Now, the Contemporary line in Sigma is not a pro line, but it's basically anything Sigma makes is pretty darn good. They're probably the most known or best quality, arguably, in the third-party lens manufacturing world. And so you can expect some good quality out of this lens, and I'm going to explain that in a little bit. It's built well, okay? It's rubberized. It's got a well-built lens hood. It's weather sealed to some degree. It does have literal rubber gaskets between the lens and the camera. So in a catastrophe, you're not going to lose your weather sealed. You might lose the lens, but you're not going to lose your weather sealed camera. So that's a good trade-off. It is splash proof. So if you happen to get caught in a slight rain or you splash some water on it, it's probably not going to ruin the lens or anything. It's got 20 elements and 14 groups. That's a lot of glass, so it makes it a little bit heavier. It's got a 9-blade aperture, so your bokeh is pretty good. It's got a very nice tripod collar, very nice steel, strong tripod collar. It does have a 95 millimeter filter size, which I challenge you to buy a filter for that. It'll cost you a lot of money. Again, filters, I just don't use them for wildlife work. Some people may. That's up to them. It's got full-time manual focus, as I would expect. Now, I guess I'll list a con here before I get to the cons, actually. It's a small manual focus ring. I found that to be a little clunky, and for some of you, that may actually be a deal breaker. Now, for me, it's not. I'm using autofocus 99% of the time, but I thought that they could have done a little better job with the width of the focusing ring. But for their first crack at this, I thought they did pretty good. It has an autofocus switch on the side. which is a very nice feature most super telephotos have. So what that means is, if I'm taking pictures of birds in flight and I know that they're going to be greater than 10 meters from me, I can switch it to the 10 meter to infinity mode, and I can photograph those birds supposedly faster. The autofocus is going to engage much quicker. I don't know if that's true. It's what they say. I put it on that mode just to be on the safe side. I assume that the company knows what they're talking about. So, good feature. Nice to have. This lens has a killer, and I mean killer, optical stabilization system. I can't believe how good it is. I'd say 2 stops handheld, 3 stops with a little bit of, maybe if you rested your arm on something, you probably get 3 stops out of it. To me, I like that, and I even use it on tripod mounted images. It's very, very high quality. Can't say enough good things about it. It does have 2 modes for optical stabilization. Mode 1 is to stabilize the entire image. Mode 2 is for panning. So if I'm panning from left to right on a bird in flight, I would use mode 2. So it will stabilize the x-axis, I believe, but not the y-axis. It's sharp through 600, but its sweet spot is in the 300 to 400 millimeter range. That's typical of zoom super telephotos, but honestly, I'm happy with it. Would a 600 f4 from Canon be sharper? Well, probably. Would it be significantly sharper? It's debatable. Again, lighting, focal length, all these things come into play. But, at the end of the day, I spent $1,089 for something that I can take great shots with. Will I ever buy a 600mm f4? I don't think so. I think I'm happy with this. Again, I just sit there and I think, what would the advantage be? Could I even hope to get back that $7,000 I put into that lens? That's things you have to ask yourself. One really, really cool feature of this lens, and this is a new Sigma feature, I guess, if you will, and there's multiple lenses that support this, but you can have a docking station with this lens. So why is that cool? Well, let's just suppose I've got a camera that this lens just doesn't focus well with, okay, and I don't have a micro adjust feature on my camera. This lens can actually micro adjust itself, and you can do that through software when it's hooked up to the docking station. To enhance the autofocus system, you can enhance you can set it to different meters. So instead of 10 meters to infinity, it could be 20 meters to infinity. You can download latest firmware that supports your camera body better. This is a no-brainer. I just can't believe that Canon and Nikon and Tamron are not doing this. Now, the only reason I can figure that they're not doing it, because I guarantee you they've thought of it, is that it's going to make the lenses last longer, right? They want you to buy lenses. This is my theory, of course. And just take it or leave it. Manufacturers want you to buy lenses, right? Why would they make that lens last through 20 different camera bodies? That's just a theory. Take it or leave it. But I wish they would all come out with this docking station because it is cool. Some of the cons: it's a fairly heavy lens. I mean, you got to kind of expect that when you got 600 millimeters of glass. So it's coming in at about 4 pounds. Now that's not a lot compared to other lenses in its category. Even its bigger brother, the Sigma, makes a totally weather sealed version of this lens. Maybe slightly sharper. It's called the Sport version, and it comes in at I think it's 6 pounds. So this is a fairly lightweight lens in its category, but I listed it as a con because for some people, they just can't lift that much glass. The autofocus could be better. Okay, I'm not going to give this thing 5 stars on autofocus. Maybe 4. Maybe 3.5, 4. It's good autofocus. It works. But depending on what camera body you're using with it, you may notice some differences. The 1D Mark II, for example, which is the 1 series, drives this lens very well. The 7D, it's okay. Keep that in mind. But so far, I'm quite happy with it. I mean, I had to list some cons, and that's the only thing I could really think of. Okay, so I think the bottom line is, and before we move on to something else, I just want to say, hey, if you can afford the better quality stuff, if you really honestly can look inside your heart and your bank account and say, yep, I can do the $7,000, then by all means, do the $7,000. But if you're like a lot of us out there and you can't afford it, don't stress. There is a way out. There is a way to make this thing work. And these lenses are great alternatives to the higher end glass. And I just encourage you to check them out. I mean, you may find that you don't like them, and that's fine. That's why we have all these alternatives and different types of lenses. But really think about it and decide, is this something I could use? Could I actually get into serious wildlife photography now that they have these better super zooms? Because that was the problem, wasn't it? I mean, remember, back in the 90s when I started getting serious in photography, I stayed away from wildlife just because I couldn't afford the lenses. Literally, I was like Kraft macaroni and cheese broke, and I just couldn't do it. And I feel for people like that because I was there. And so now I feel like we have an alternative. I feel like we can afford the better quality glass. So I just want to encourage you in that and get out there and take some great shots. Okay, welcome back. This is the new Know Your Subject segment. And in this segment, I am talking about how we can better know our subjects and how they behave. Animal behavior is crucial, I think, to being a great photographer. And I truly believe that in order to be a better wildlife photographer, we must know the subject and know what to expect from that subject. The sound you just heard was that of the red-bellied woodpecker. I love this bird. This is a very interesting bird. It's one of my favorite birds to photograph. It's also a very challenging bird to photograph. Cornell's Lab of Ornithology defines the red-bellied woodpecker as a pale, medium-sized woodpecker, common in forests of the East. Their strikingly barred backs and gleaming red caps make them an unforgettable sight. Here's some interesting facts on the red-bellied woodpecker. Although it does have a small patch of red on its belly, the red-bellied woodpecker is most known for its red-orange head. It is often mistakenly called a red-headed woodpecker, which is a completely different species. The oldest red-bellied woodpecker lived over 12 years. Red-bellied woodpeckers have a very loud call and often make themselves known before and after landing. Yeah, you'll hear them a long ways away. They have a very piercing call. The red-bellied woodpecker is a cavity-dwelling bird and lives in hollowed-out areas and old trees. The bird often finds its food under the bark of trees and is less apt to drill into the wood, but rather scrapes the bark up to look under it. Another interesting fact about the red-bellied woodpecker is, and woodpeckers in general, if you ever look at their tongue, they have barbs on the end of it. It looks like little hooks. And what that's for is when they wedge up a piece of bark, they can use that tongue to actually spear an insect. So that's cool stuff, man. I mean, it's a really interesting looking tongue. Okay, so how do I track the red-bellied woodpecker? Well, you track them just like you would any other woodpecker. They like rotten trees, So, and although they're quite skittish of we humans, it can be attracted to a feeder by using suet specifically designed for woodpeckers. In America, this suet is sold in department stores and home improvement stores. They'll also eat chunks of fruit mixed with seed at regular feeders. If you live in a forested area, it should be relatively easy trick to lure them in, and they should feed once or twice a day, sometimes more. The bird, as I stated earlier, is easily frightened. It's going to fly away at the first sign of movement. These birds are intelligent. They're actually one of the more intelligent birds out there. They're close to crows in intelligence. So it's imperative that you be hidden from them when you're photographing them. You need to be in a blind, inside your car, outside the window at your house, something like that. You need something to conceal your movement. So once you have a good blind set up, you need to find a perch. And this is usually a rotten log or a small tree that's rotting. A good size is about as big around as a fence post. You can drive it into the ground. You can put it in a Christmas tree stand. And where I find these logs is just looking on the forest floor when I'm out in the forested areas. And I like to look for a tree that has lichen on it and moss and things like that, because it makes a better photograph. So once you have that tree, you drill 2 1-inch holes in the tree just out of sight so you can't see it from the camera. You stuff those holes with the suet, and you mount it about 5 feet off the ground, and you're ready to go. That's all there is to it. If you want to read more about this, I did a whole blog on how to attract woodpeckers to your backyard, and you can click on the link in the show notes for that. One more thing about the woodpeckers, especially the red-headed woodpecker, they often have a red patch on them. In this case, their whole top of their head is one big stripe of orange, and the rest of their body is kind of a grayish white with black stripes. That is an exposure nightmare, because in order to expose for the bird, oftentimes you're going to blow out the red channel. And we talked about this last week. You're going to blow out that red channel on his crest, and that's not good. So you're going to have to underexpose slightly with this bird. It's just the way it is. Either that or you're going to lose all the detail and the feathers on the top of the head. So you gotta play around with exposure on this guy. But I'll tell you what, he's a beautiful bird. It is photographed an awful lot. You're going to see a lot of images out there, but who cares? Photograph it anyway. This is the thing. I once heard this from Moose Peterson. Photograph that common bird, because tomorrow it may not be a common bird anymore. You know, it could dwindle into extinction for all we know. We never know what kind of disease or influence can have on these birds that they may be gone. So go ahead, take pictures of the robins, take pictures of the red-bellied woodpeckers. You know, enjoy. Stop worrying about what everybody else is doing. Well, that brings us to the end of this podcast. On the next episode, I'm going to take our adventures a step further. We're going to discuss tripods and other camera support technologies, and which ones I think are goodbye, which ones I think are not. I just wanted to leave you with this thought from L.L. Rue III. My reason for being is to make others aware through words and photographs of the beauty with which our Lord has surrounded us. Thanks for listening. Make it a great day, and get out there and enjoy nature. Bye-bye. Music for this episode was provided by Dr. Turtle.